And Saundra has, oh my God, like we connected. I felt like we had been friends for years, like the first time that she and I had met. Um, her energy and her strength and her belief in me. Because when we first started talking, I had just started getting into doing more coaching and really had been terrified of stepping into that space. And her encouragement of Rasa, just make this happen. But I believe where I have grown with her is that her constant belief in me, like unwavering, has been a amazing thing for me for growth. Sometimes being the leader in in my firm, there's not a whole lot of cheerleaders. You are the cheerleader. And sometimes you really need a cheerleader sometimes. You really do. And she is. That is exactly what she is. So thank you.
Well, thank
Great.
you for that. You're amazing. Thank you. All right, Carlyn.
Hi. I got licensed in the summer of 2021. So coming off the tail end of the COVID market, and don't ask for anything, offer the most you possibly can, and hope that it's worth it, all the way to like now slowing down to kind of a evening out market, but still kind of funny just as far as buyer activity with the interest rates and inventory being limited and all that kind of stuff. So I've seen a lot in my almost 4 years in the business. 4 years in June for me, which feels crazy to say because I still feel like a rookie. I would say my superpower is asking the right questions at the right time. And I have had to fail forward in that by not setting good expectations with clients and learning how to set the right expectations, and how to really display value instead of saying all the right things, to actually show that value and to be able to bring that to clients and ultimately to the closing table. So I've learned a lot in a short period of time, and I still consider myself a student of the industry. So I encourage all of you to just kind of approach every day in real estate as an opportunity to learn something and grow alongside your clients. And sometimes we have to lock arms with our clients and say, let's learn this together.
I love that. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. And Saundra has coached me pretty much since day one. We did not have a team leader at my market center when I was kind of brought on, and she saw me as someone who really needed mentorship and guidance. And so ever since I've been in the industry, I've had Saundra in my corner, rooting me on and teaching me how to think about real estate like a business and not a job, and how to really have a business mentality as far as the money part goes, and just kind of pacing myself so that I can not be so overwhelmed with having to do all of the things. She really taught me how to take this industry and this life, one bite at a time.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you, Carlyn. Denise?
That's hard to follow up. That's good. You guys are good. I'm impressed. We got an impressive group of people here. And I see faces that I know, which is exciting. So I'm Denise Hauser. I'm sorry I'm on a chain because my headset's about to die, but I really do like talking on this because then you can hear a little more like my voice is really there next to you. So I got into business in 2017, and I have been with Keller Williams Connected for 95% of the time I've been in real estate. Saundra was there from the very beginning when I joined a team with Keith Sandman, if anybody knows him. He's still a good friend of mine. One of my first friends when I moved to Charlotte in 2006. So you don't typically join the team just because your friend started it, but that's definitely what I did. I was like, oh, I'll get my license and I'll join your real estate team. So Saundra was there with me, really helping me learn how to grow a business and not just say, well, I'm a real estate agent, now what do I do? Because I think filling those days can be the most challenging part in the beginning. And then as our market center went through a number of changes, Saundra was able to be there with us some. She left and went to Wilmington, Maryland. She came back and was always a constant in my life in terms of the support and her energy, which was really amazing. Not anything I've ever seen anyone else have. It's just the truly bright spot in somebody's day is when you see Saundra. Like, she's always there for a hug. She's there with a kind word, something sympathetic, something energizing. I mean, she's just been one of my favorite people to know in real estate. So I am proud to say I went through some of the hardest moments of my life while being in real estate, and have been able to grow a pretty large business. So I've been in the top 300 agents in the Charlotte area for the past 5 years, which is really exciting. I'm a single mom. I divorced a narcissist a couple years ago, so that was a very, very difficult thing. And I'm much happier now. I actually look younger, even though I'm getting remarkably older. So my superpower, I think, has really come from some of the difficulties in my life that I experienced, which I'm sure we could all say. We've all gone through something that's put us where we are today, for good and for bad, right? I think it's connecting with people where they are, knowing that I'm growing where I'm planted and being able to provide that service to them, as well as helping them grow where they're planted. So it may be identifying the challenge that they have to overcome to maybe achieve that real estate dream for the first time, or perhaps it's not the right time for them to buy or sell, and the way that I can still contribute to their life in a positive way. So being able to be energetic, knowledge-based, come from contribution, and also use my sympathy to be able to connect with people, because I'm a good relationship builder. So that's kind of my superpower when it comes to the real estate element in general. And then that applies to negotiation, with being able to not only sometimes you're negotiating with your own clients, right, to make sure that we are approaching things in the way that's not only legal but effective and realistic, but then negotiating on the other side just to ensure that we are seeing that we're trying to buy and sell. We've got competing interests. You've got someone who's wanting to sell an asset, and you have people that are wanting to buy an asset. So making sure we're bridging that and keeping in mind that we all are still people in the end. It's not the house's fault. It's just identifying how we can be strategic and make sure that everybody's getting something. So keeping in mind that human center is usually how I do better with negotiations.
You are so great with that. And some of you already answered the questions that I'm going to ask in advance in your introduction, and we're still going to go through them just to make sure no one left any of the things out that they really want to make sure they're going to share. We're going to go through all these questions with this amazing panel that you've already seen how awesome they are. And then we're going to have time at the end for questions and answers. So write your questions down. Take great notes, because we are going to ask for ahas to thank each one of these ladies for their time. And so let's start at the beginning of a client experience and talk about expectations. What are some of the conversations that you have that you think are unique to you or especially important in the beginning of working with a client to set expectations so that the transaction is smooth all the way through? And whoever wants to go first can.
Okay, I'll start.
Okay.
For me, I really think that negotiating starts with the first conversation of setting the expectation of what they expect out of the buying or selling process and how I expect them to interact with me also. So right off the bat, I ask them, what's your favorite way to be contacted? Call, text, or email. Most of the time in this market, it's been text, which can be a challenge because, you know, tone and all that doesn't necessarily apply via text, and phone calls are necessary in this industry. So pick up your dang cell phones, please. So just starting off the bat, how do you want to be contacted? How often do you want to be contacted? You know, depending on their level of engagement in the transaction, how often do you want me to reach out to you? You know, and really just being flexible to their preferences. I have had clients who don't have an email, so that has its own challenge. And then just setting that expectation of how can I win with you through this transaction? What do you expect of me? Asking that question in that way, how can I win with you? Has really helped, especially on the seller side of things, asking sellers, how can I win with you? It's not about getting them necessarily the highest offer, but getting them the smoothest transaction. So setting that expectation of, I'm here not only to get you a great offer on your house, but to help you sell this house smoothly and with the least amount of stress. Yes, it's going to be stressful to pack up the kids and the dogs and get out of the house for the showing, but I can minimize the stress on the negotiation side by understanding exactly what you want out of this process. And sometimes that's a smooth process. Sometimes that's, I will absolutely not touch any repairs. So then we can have a concession conversation and just knowing what they expect of the transaction itself and just our interaction. It helps with their perception of your professionalism to interact with them in the way that they want to be interacted with. You know, if somebody really hates a phone call and you're calling them 3 times a week, they're going to start to get really annoyed with you really fast. But if somebody really, you know, is at that age where texting is very annoying and, you know, they just don't get it or they're not fast at it or reactive to a text, and you're not picking up the phone and you're trying to text them a lot, you can really lose a lot in translation with valuing how they want to be interacted with. And that goes with other agents also. You know, you've got the agents who've been in this industry 20, 30 years who really value a phone call. And then you have agents around my age, you know, 30 and under, who they're like, just text me, just text me, just text me. I'm showing houses 12 times a day, or, you know, I've got 3 listing appointments and 2 buyer consultations today. You've got to text me. And just interacting with the other professionals in our industry also in the way that they want to be interacted with has a lot of value. But getting back to the client, because that's the more important part of the negotiating. A really important question, if you're going to write anything down that I say today, write this down. What are your deal makers and deal breakers? That question has really moved my business from just being reactive to what goes on to being able to proactively anticipate the needs of the client. You know, if somebody tells me that a deal breaker would be an offer under X amount, if we get an offer under that amount, I can say to the other agent, hey, my client has already told me that they're very unlikely to accept an offer at the amount that you've offered. I would recommend you to take this back to your client and let them know that. But I will be still presenting the offer because, you know, that's our legal obligation. So just having that conversation, what are your deal breakers going in? For a buyer, it might be that they had a bad experience with termites at a previous house. And if there's anything to do with termites, they're going to run scared away. Doesn't matter how great or how bad the house is otherwise. If termites are their deal breaker and they're just unwilling to move forward if there's a termite issue, we know that up front, and we can ask questions around that prior to going under contract to anticipate that need. I know that was a little long-winded, but I hope that's helpful for the very beginning portion of interacting with clients.
That was so good. Thank you. One of the things that you said that I hope everyone here already incorporates into your business, talking about different age groups, I know that we're really mindful in the way that we do real estate and ensuring that we take care of everyone equally. And I think that we don't always spend enough time on generational diversity and ensuring that we communicate with people and we're mindful of what generation we fall into and how we think and how they think. And if you incorporate that into your business plan to make sure that you're approaching and marketing to people that are of all different generations and that you understand how to win with people and their mindsets in all different generations, that's going to go far and help you have a diverse business. So thank you for bringing that up. It's really important. Who would like to share how you set expectations next?
I think I'll tell you one of the biggest things, and I guess because of the fact that I've been in this industry like forever, market knowledge walking into especially on the seller side, well, buyer side as well, but especially if we're looking at going into a listing appointment and knowing your market. Right now, the market and currently the market that Wilmington's in right now literally is changing almost weekly. Like things have been changing up so fast, and things that we put on the market will sit like forever. And you're like, oh my God, this is gonna be a home run. We're gonna have multiple offers. This will be gone. And it's not. And what we're noticing now is staying really abreast with the market information. I sit down every Monday, go through. Cape Fear does a great job of their market reports. I read the Wall Street Journal. I read all of our market reports. I will read the Wilmington Business Journal. I go through all of the news, update all of our sellers as we go. So that way, when I walk into a seller's home for the first time, I am setting the expectation up front going, okay, look, I'm number one, this is where I think we are at this exact moment. Things are subject to change tomorrow. And if we go ahead and have those conversations up front where they have a full understanding of what the market is actually doing, and you're coming every week with information going, hey, there's been more tariffs, or this interest rates have not budged. Now, buyer confidence is going to go down. Because of the climate where we are right now, I think educating your sellers up front about the market conditions, and then you can actually make small adjustments as you go. I mean, we just had one that we actually did a price increase on. So these things can all start feeding in, and that way, when you do sit down with your sellers with a contract that comes in significantly lower than what they were expecting, but however, you've been educating them all along going, hey, buyer confidence is going down, days on market are going up. We're seeing X amount of price reductions this week. This is where we are. This is where the buyers came in. It will actually help you from a financial standpoint to be able to close the gap that way. So that's been I think that's been one of the strongest points of negotiation, because that's all the way up front, way before you ever get a contract. And that way you're coming from a numbers and you're not coming from an emotional standpoint. You're actually just coming just as a stockbroker would, just as anybody else would. So you're coming in with the financial data for them to be able to look at. And therefore the bad news isn't or good news isn't necessarily coming from you. It's coming from the market. Here's the market. This is what the market's doing. So that's one of my favorite things that I do.
I love that so much. One of the things that you made me just think about is whether it is you working with your client and navigating the market, or whether it is you in a relationship with someone. If you can just imagine yourself, like what Rasa just said, sitting side by side with the client, and together side by side, you're looking at the market. And that's what you're focused on, versus we're on each side and the other person is the problem, right? And the market's in the middle. Just imagine anytime you're having these conversations in the beginning of a relationship that you're on the same team, and your job is just to interpret or identify the details of what you're navigating together so that everyone's clear on what you're doing. And that's exactly what you're talking about, and you're so good at it. So also, if you have access to NAR does national stats. One of the things that I shared on a call that we had this morning, that was about some of the national stats, is if you are consistently communicating on your social media where people can see it, whether you do YouTube or any other platforms, what's happening in your local market, like what Rasa's talking about right now, versus what's happening nationally, you can get ahead of people's perspectives that they're getting from the news, such that you're proactively educating them on what's happening in the hyper local area that you're focused on. So if you just figure out how to incorporate that into your social media monthly, twice a month, however often you're comfortable with, such that it's consistent, they're going to know that you're the one that's on top of it. So thank you. Okay. Do we want to talk about how you set expectations, ma'am?
Okay, so one thing that, and everything that's been said so far, I fully agree with. And to play on what both Rasa and Carlyn both said, is at the end of your meeting, whether this is the initial or this is a next meeting or this is a phone call, making sure you're telling your client or customer the specific next steps. So this is what your homework is, and this is what I'm going to do. And sometimes it's saying it twice. So remember, I'm going to be going next and calling this person, and I'm going to be finding this information. What you're going to do is you're going to do this, and then we're going to talk again at this point. So that way you have a timeline and you have steps for them. Depending on whether they're an A, a B, or C client, so whether it's a buyer or seller who's ready to go in the next 30 days or in the next 60 to 90 days or beyond that period, wherever they fall in that category, it's probably going to define how soon you're going to talk to them again. But that's going to be something that the better that expectation is set, the less frustrated they feel. They may feel like there's no activity or no action with them, when in truth, it's because they said they're going to sell next year. So you may be where it's appropriate to talk to them every other week, but they might think you should be calling them every day. So if you're saying, hey, this is your homework, this is what I'm going to be working on, and I'm thinking we're going to be talking now every other week until this fall. And then we'll start really looking at comparables, because to what Rasa was saying, information is going to change on the daily. I can tell you what your house is going to sell for today, but that's likely going to be different than what your house is going to sell for next summer. So as long as you have that information already clear, there is less likely to be frustration, disappointment, lack of activity, and usually that experience that every agent has at least once, where somebody has ghosted you, maybe just because the expectation wasn't initially set in the best way. So then the client didn't know what to expect next, even if they are still a customer. Even if it's, I want to buy in 5 years and I'm moving from Michigan, you need to have those next action steps. Otherwise, how do you know when it's appropriate to follow up? You shouldn't be talking to them necessarily every day if they're not going to buy for 5 years. It's not the best use of your time, and it's not setting a realistic expectation either, you know? And to Carlyn's point about knowing how people want you to communicate with them, I've had a client that was very frustrated that every time he called me, I wasn't able to pick up the phone because I was already in an appointment. I was showing houses. So it was if I know that you love to talk, let's plan on talking before 8:30 in the morning every day because he was an A buyer, or we can talk in the afternoons, or we can set up a standing call every Tuesday at 11. So Tuesday at 11, we have a standing call. We have our touchy Tuesday. And then we can text at the other points, or you and I can talk before or after. Not that I'm not available sometimes during the day, but that's just so I don't miss your call because I don't want you to feel like your call's unimportant to me. But just as when we're in showings and I don't answer a call from another client, I want you to feel that time is protected just for you, right? And so then you have less irritation and then nobody feels disappointed or let down.
That is so good. And Denise, you just reminded me of something that I learned from John Maxwell because I asked him when I had the opportunity to be in a small group with him. He's one of my favorite leadership people that I follow. And if you know me or have known me long enough, I've probably recommended one or multiple of his books to you over time. So one of the things that he said when someone approached him and said, "Oh my word, what if I didn't do an excellent job of setting expectations?" And he said, "That's okay. You take ownership and you set them now." So as a leader, as a guide, as a partner to the people that you're serving, if you realize I didn't do a great job of what we're talking about here, setting those expectations, you can set them now. And you can go ahead and take ownership of that, reset the partnership, and move forward in alignment with what you commit to. And it's never too late to reset the expectations and show up that way.
Yeah, one thing to add on this topic before we move on is that 100% of the time that I have had someone I know use someone else, it has been because I did not set the expectation of next steps with them. And either I wasn't moving fast enough at the pace that they wanted to move at, or I didn't communicate with them at the level that they expected to be communicated with, and they ended up listing or buying with someone else. So people really do want to be told what to do next. I'm glad Denise mentioned that.
Awesome. A little bit of conversation happened in your introductions with superpowers. And I know, like Carlyn, specifically, there's something you do I want to make sure you mention here. So I just want you to think about, even if you already talked about it a little bit, I'd love for you to elaborate. What is your negotiation superpower? What sets you apart? What's a special thing that you do that helps you get to the closing when someone else could have let the transaction or the experience fall through?
Well, you already alluded to it, so I'll start. One thing that I've really noticed in this market is if I'm glad Rasa mentioned knowing your market, knowing what's going on in the entire market, not just the neighborhood, not just the county, not just the zip code, but what is the Charlotte market doing? What is Canopy MLS doing? What is the North Carolina market doing? And what is the national market doing? Just having a general idea. You don't have to memorize market stats every week or anything like that, but just having a general idea of what's going on in buyers and sellers' minds right now in the end of the spring market of 2025. How are sellers feeling? How are buyers feeling? What's working? What's not working? I'm sure you've all noticed we are at increased days on market. Sellers are likely still getting at least 98% of their asking price, but it's taking longer to get that done. Buyers are asking for the world and not necessarily getting it, but to get to the closing table requires a lot of work right now. So it's something that's really, really worked for me, especially when I have an impatient seller whose days on market are increasing and that frustration level has started to grow, is doing a reverse offer. So if you're a buyer's agent, you're making an offer, right? If you're the listing agent, you can make a reverse offer on behalf of the seller to a buyer's agent. So what I've been doing is I look at the showing time report. How many showings have we had? How many days has it taken to get to that showing number? And who's the most interested based on feedback? Now, I know feedback is a whole other topic that we can talk about, but no feedback is feedback. Understand that if a buyer was so excited to see that house, you would have received feedback about that. If the buyer was like, I don't really have anything good or bad to say about it, let's move on and see some other houses, no feedback is feedback. So when you're getting any kind of written feedback from a buyer's agent following a showing, like master bedroom was a little too small, primary bedroom was a little too small, or the living space didn't flow like we wanted it to, or something that's not a deal breaker to your seller is seemingly a deal breaker to the buyer in the feedback, always 100% of the time follow up on showing time feedback. I start in the order of most detailed to least detailed. So if you leave me 3 sentences of feedback, One, you're a really thorough buyer's agent, and I might want to work with you on the other side of a transaction. So I'll follow up and I'll say, hey, I noticed that you guys saw the house. You left us feedback on Friday. It's Monday. I'm curious if you've made a decision on another home. Let me know. I'm the listing agent for XYZ property. And then if they say, oh, well, we did see other houses over the weekend, go to your seller and say, hey, these buyers left us some pretty good feedback about your house. Here's what they had to say. How would you feel about making them an offer? Then you're asking your seller, what is a win-win here? Okay, yeah, we're listed for $450. What kind of a reverse offer makes sense for you, Mr. Seller, to offer this buyer? They didn't like this about your house. What number do you think might work for them and for you to offer them on your house? They might say, tell them we'll take $440 if they'll move forward with it and close this month. Awesome. Do I have your permission to share that information with this buyer's agent only? Yes, you do. Okay, awesome. 100% of the time, please make sure that you are having that specific conversation and getting the seller's permission to share that information with just that agent. Because you don't want to now blast out to MLS, seller will now take this number if you close this month. That's not what the seller said, right? The seller said they were willing to make that buyer a reverse offer and give them terms that nobody else has seen yet because they're already interested in the house. So then you can call a buyer's agent and say, hey, my seller really liked your feedback. I just got off the phone with them. They're willing to take $440 for the house, which is a $10,000 discount. Definitely emphasize what you're giving them, which is a $10,000 discount off of our listed price. If you guys can close this month, let me know what your buyer thinks. End of phone call. We're not talking about any other information on that phone call. We're not trying to negotiate any other terms or get really fluffy and get to know the buyer's agent. That's the offer that the seller has made. End of the phone call. Let me know what you guys think. Okay, bye. Gotta go. Then this has worked for me so many times because what happens is they will usually write the offer you ask for. This just happened to me on a listing that I had in the Mint Hill area. We were taking, I have a 10 showing, 10 offer, 10 showings to 1 offer ratio of conversion for my listings. Everybody's going to be different. I definitely recommend you study your number of showings to number of offers ratio in showing time. You can pull any of your past listings, look at how many showings it took to get an offer, and then take that ratio to your sellers and say, hey, it usually takes me 12 showings to get an offer. If we haven't quite hit 12, I wouldn't recommend dropping the price or anything like that. You guys can study your own stats as far as that goes. I have about a 10 showing to 1 offer conversion ratio on average. So I share that with my sellers and I say, hey, for every 10 showings we get on your house, we should expect at least 1 buyer to write an offer. So if we haven't hit that 10, we're not in a place to make a reverse offer. So if we've got, 15 to 20 showings, and we've got some feedback here, that's when the reverse offer comes into play. And every time I have made a reverse offer for one of my sellers, the buyer's agent has written that offer or very, very, very close to it. And it's been a win-win. And then I can say to my seller, hey, remember when we just had that conversation about that reverse offer and just offering that 1 buyer a little less to see if we can make a win-win? Well, they just gave it to us. Are you ready to accept it? And I'm nodding. And they say, yeah, let's do it. And then we move forward, and almost all of the time, they're a much easier buyer to work with to get to the closing table than it would have been if we were, say, in multiples and, they felt like they were overpaying already. And then now we're negotiating and all this kind of back and forth stuff. You're kind of setting the precedent of, hey, me and my seller are easy to people to work with. Let's get you a win-win to get under contract. Then if we have any other negotiations throughout the process, we're coming at it from that win-win perspective of how can my seller win and your buyer close and us both feel like we won this deal.
I love that. And we definitely can do a more thorough training on that. Rasa wrote in the message that she's had several of these work over the years. Is there anything you would add to that conversation, Rasa, around that? What's worked for you around that?
Even the ones that didn't work, I think what was interesting is that I think it gives the sellers the idea that you're actually doing, like you're creative, like you're coming up with creative solutions, because 99% of the other agents out there are not doing that. And some feel like it's coming from a place of weakness, or you're showing your cards, or I've never had any really bad backfires on it other than somebody just says, yeah, no, this still really isn't the house. but I think for the seller's perspective, I think you become the person who's a lot more creative. You're thinking through the process a whole lot more differently than, like I said, 99% of the other agents out there who would not even dare to step into that. Because usually the first question the seller's like, has it worked? Did it really work? And I'm like, well, yeah, it's worked several times. And I've, and especially like you said, based on the feedback, oh my God, we really love it, but we might have a house that we need to sell and we might have this or that. And you're like, well, hey, we would actually consider a contingency and we would consider it if the price is a little sweeter. Is that something that you guys would? And then, yeah, and then exactly what you said, go ahead and present it over to the buyer's agent. I love it. I think it's a great tactic.
And I'm glad that you mentioned creativeness, because what's the worst that could happen, right? The buyer's agent says, oh, well, it's still not the right house for my buyer. That's the worst that can happen. Oh, okay. And then you go to the next best feedback and say, hey, how interested are you guys? Ask the seller again. The last people weren't that interested. Do you want to make the same reverse offer to the next people? If they say yes, of course, with their permission, got to stay within license law and all of that. You're letting the next person know, hey, this is the reverse offer my seller would like to offer just your buyers. Please let us know by end of day if that would work for you guys. What's the worst that could happen? No, it's still not the house for us. On to the next.
Exactly.
And then I think it also does something, a little mental shift happens for the seller, because just because they're listed at that, I'm just using 450 as because that's around the average price point in the Charlotte market. Just because they're listed at 450 doesn't mean that they wouldn't necessarily take less. So if you're in a position where the days on market is increasing, their level of frustration is increasing, or their stress levels have been off the roof, and you guys are kind of having some of those frustrated conversations, it gets them to the point, if none of their reverse offers end up working, now you're in a position of what the seller would take for the house. And Mr. Seller, would you consider reducing the price so that all buyers have the opportunity to offer that number on your house? Does that still feel like a win to you? And because I asked at the beginning of our interaction, how can I win with you? Reminding them again, does that still sound like a win to you? And that them winning is still a priority to me. It kind of softens their brain as far as considering a price reduction goes when they're making a reverse offer if it doesn't end up working out.
I love how you just moved it all the way back around to the price reduction if you need to get there for them to be able to get what they need for their house.
Nice soft intro to the price reduction conversation sometimes. Yeah.
Rasa and Denise, what are the superpowers that you find that you have in negotiation that set you apart, or any little small tips or tricks that help people with that part?
For me, it's all about the creativity in negotiations. I think the number one, I am super cool under pressure. I generally do not get flapped about things. I'm very to the point, very numbers oriented, as you guys could probably tell. And really, if I've done my seller net sheet, if I know where they're coming from, if I know where they are as far as comfort level on, especially if something comes in a little bit too low, I always tell them, look, somebody's trying to give you money. You just don't like how much. That's okay, but we still got somebody trying to give you money. So let's try to work with it. Again, very numbers oriented. I go back to where we are in the market. Is this fair? I try to do that. So I'm super cool, calm, and collected. I also encourage my sellers for us not to make a decision on things until I know the full story. So I think Carlyn, back to what you were saying about, I know us old schoolers, we do like phone calls and phone conversations. If I get text messages from agents on the negotiation, all of a sudden there's this offer that lands in my inbox, and then I get a text message going, hey, I just sent you an offer. I immediately pick up the phone and have a conversation with the agent, because I'm like, I'm not presenting this until we talk, because I need to know what your buyers are doing, where they're from, what your motivations are, see if I can get kind of what their wins are on their side. So I tell my sellers, hey, I've got an offer coming in. It's landed in my inbox. Let me have a conversation. So that way I'm not going in first thing. And the seller immediately will be like, well, where are they from? Well, why are they moving? Or, I mean, you start getting these questions. And if you've just had this simple text message from an agent going, offers in your inbox, I don't know anything other than that's on this piece of paper. And I think my strong suit on the negotiations, I think, is actually getting all the information ahead of time before I actually talk to the seller. And I'll say, hey, I'm sending this over to you, but I'm not ready to have a conversation with you until I know more about what's going on with these people. So I actually try to slow the brakes down just a little bit. So that way we can have a really good conversation about the offer, about the people, what their motivations are. Do they have a house to sell? You know, are they looking to move in a short period of time? You know, what are their drivers? So I do think that having all the information up front and the phone conversation and not a text message is so much better for me. So I think that's it for me.
It sounds like you're really clear on what creates an awesome experience for your sellers over the years.
I have tried. Some better than others.
There is no try, ma'am. You have done it. Denise?
So one of the things that I revert back to a lot, and by the way, I'm on the buyer side 99% of the time. So I don't know if I said that before. So you're gonna hear me talk about that a little bit more. But if we have discussed from the beginning what their goals are, and the 3 L's is something that I describe to people and have them identify with me. And to me, the 3 L's means lot, layout, and location, because those are things that are not as malleable. It's difficult to change your lot. It can be done, but it's hard. It is difficult to change your layout. It is almost impossible to change your location. And there may be factors of your location that can affect your ability to perceive value in that home. So throughout our transaction, I will go back to the 3 L's a lot of times, just to remind people that this house does meet all 3 of those. And to be able to have 3 is better than what we've seen on the other homes we've toured so far. So you're already identifying where that value proposition is for those clients. Also saying to them periodically, a home is what a buyer is willing to pay. I understand this is the list price, and the seller may have a particular number that they want to reach. They haven't shared that net with me, but what they have said is these are the important things. So from talking to their agent, here is what we know. So remember, these lot, layout, location all work for you. Yes, you would rather pay X for the house. They're looking for something more in the direction of Y. But if every home that we've looked at over a period of time, you've seen that they've closed between list price or 2% over, or maybe they've closed 2% under, is it worth risking that little bit of money to not be able to make the offer that gets you in this home? Essentially, what is it worth to you? And then breaking down, even during the transaction, say we're having trouble with repairs, because I feel like that's more negotiating to me is spent on repairs than it is initially going under contract typically. Especially now. So looking at repairs, okay, I understand that sellers aren't fixing these things. I always get quotes when we make our list of the items that we're going to ask for the seller to address. So that way we have a range of where we think these repairs could cost the client. So, okay, I understand that it's disappointing to hear that the seller does not want to address these things. This house is $950,000. These repairs in total are less than 1% of the value of the home. In the Charlotte region, we are seeing homes gain value 2.5% to 4.5% year over year. So theoretically, if you're going to stay in this house, and I know you're planning to be here for at least 5 to 8 years as the average buyer is in our area, you can gain equity back that's going to offset what you're going to have to do for the repair. So just using numbers that way. Also when we're making our offer, or perhaps if we're asking for closing costs or something to that effect, what does that cash look like for you over the life of the loan? Okay, well, we're $8,000 higher than where we wanted to be. Is it really worth that difference? That's only an X% of the purchase price. So maybe, okay, we're 2% apart. But if you look at that, breaking it down with your mortgage loan that you're going to get, that $8,000, how much is that really going to cost you when you're financing it? So then being able to look at, okay, well, is it worth the $50 to $75 difference a month that you're going to pay for that additional financing? That's less than a couple days worth of groceries. So giving them that perspective usually is very effective. In the same way, speaking to the listing agent about it when we're talking how close we are and how little of a difference it makes. I had an interesting one a couple weeks ago where I framed something for the listing agent that she took back to her sellers, and it worked for us, which was we were $2,500 apart on a $625,000 house. Seems a little silly, but my folks were cash. They weren't using mortgage. So I wasn't able to say, gosh, you'll never feel that $2,500, or I can tell it's going to appraise. In this case, we're not having an appraisal. $2,500 in cash is a lot of money. They were done. We'd already talked about where is your finite line. That was their line in the sand. They were okay losing it over $2,500. And we had talked about it. Okay, where are you okay losing this house? It's right there. So I went back to the seller and I said, it's Easter weekend. This is the seller's agent. And I said, I hate that you guys are going to have 16 showings, because she'd mentioned they had 16 showings. And I said, I would pay $2,500 just to be left alone this holy weekend with my kids. And I was like, I really would. And she's like, that's so funny that you said that. I'm going to call the sellers and see what they say. And so she called the sellers and said, we can save getting you out of the house 16 times for these showings. Sorry, I got a phone call. Hold on, am I back? Can you hear me? Okay, I can't, hold on a second.
Yes, we can hear you. We could hear you the whole time.
Hold on. When I get a phone call, it'll take it off and it'll put it on my phone, and then I can't. So, anyways, so she went back to her client and it's gone again. All right, let me just take my headset off. All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we could hear you the whole time.
Okay. Sorry about that. So once I went back to her, the agent, and I said that, she went back to her client and she said, you don't have to leave your house 16 times if you are willing to accept that you're going to be $2,500 less than your ideal net. And they said, done, you're right, let's do it. I never thought about it that way. Now, repair negotiations was not as pleasant as we wanted it to be, but I knew that already. So once I told my clients, hey, they're willing to accept your final number, keep in mind, there may be items that they don't address. But remember, husband, you had mentioned that you used to be in the construction industry. Are these things that you may want to think about that you would repair on your own? Wife, remember that there were some things about the home that you didn't like, but they were all cosmetic. So are those things that you can live with over time? And the answer was yes. And so then when we got the repair request and we weren't thrilled with the things that they were going to address, they remembered what I had mentioned to them going into it. We thought that this might happen. I know it's not as ideal, but is it worth it to you to carry on? So it's almost like they lost the $2,500 on the repairs, but they gained it on the purchase price. So the net was all kind of the same. But the bottom line was, it's still the lot, it's still the layout, it's still the location on that house that they want. And they've been looking for 2 years, 2 full years. So here we are, and we got to the end. So being able to go back to that percentage, how much it's going to cost them, setting the expectation for how we think the seller may respond, and also going back to that lot layout location piece.
That is so good. Thank you, Denise.
Sorry for my headset drama.
It's okay. It did not cause a lot of interruption. I'm so
It's good.
glad.
It's just like real estate, right? It's pivoting.
So I want to kind of combine number 4 and 5, the questions I sent to you guys. So if you think about when things get tense or uncertain in the journey, as they sometimes do, and many times as you're really close to closing, what is 1 or 2 simple things that you keep in mind, or that you say, or ways that you show up that help people feel like you have their back and get them to the closing table and kind of calm the waters at moments that it really could be tumultuous? And I would just love to hear each of your perspectives on things that you do to help get to the closing when hard things show up.
Well,
I think the thing is, it's not about us. It's never about us. Get your commission, get all of that out of your head. It has absolutely nothing to do with us. And it has everything to do with keeping cool, not exploding, getting your emotions out of it, keeping the facts in front of you. And it's a really emotional time for them. It is not an emotional time for us. And you have to keep them separate. I think that is probably one of the biggest things I coach on in my office. We have a lot of, and we handle a lot of luxury, and that brings a whole nother level of intensity. And there's a lot of things, because there's some really big commission checks sitting on the table. There's a lot of money that's crossing over my desk on a daily basis. I'm like, God. But it is not our place to get emotional about it. I think my granddaddy used to always say, don't count your chickens until they hatch. I mean, I'm telling you, that is the mentality. Like, that commission check is not yours until it records and that money actually hits your account. And when you get out of the mindset, it is not about me, it's about them, of keeping a super cool head. do not react to nasty text messages, to nasty emails, to nasty phone calls. Best thing you can do is just get quiet and listen, take a breath, because 90% of the time, whatever those sellers or those buyers are telling you in that moment really isn't directed at you. You're just the scapegoat. You're the easiest person. You're the first person. You're the first line of defense. It's your job to quarterback this thing. Like, that's your job. You're there to take hits and to get, you know, punched in the gut occasionally. And the kinder you are through the entire process, the less emotion that you have through the entire process. I have had sellers come to my office and apologize. I have had people going, oh my God, thank you so much for just, I don't know where my head was. I'm like, you know, this is one of the biggest purchases of like probably your entire life. This is one of the biggest investments. Of course you're getting emotional. I'm not. So that, I think, is the biggest key in all of this, is helping get things to the finish line, is staying cool, calm, collected. You can go home and scream and beat a pillow and do whatever it is that you got to do when you get home, but in front of your client, there's no room, because it's not about us. It never is.
That's so good.
I love that you started with that, because I would totally agree with that, and saying that listening, I'm glad you brought up listening, you know, sit back, get quiet when things, you know, get frustrating, whether it's your client to you or the other side of the transaction to you. When people show you and tell you who they are, listen to them, you know, believe them. At the beginning, I always ask, you know, how can I win with you? Remind your buyers and sellers of that at the end. You know, if things get a little frustrating with them or a little stressful in the move process, and, you know, they're trying to move out as fast as they can, and, you know, you're 3 days from closing and they haven't even packed the upstairs yet, you know, that's stressful. But there are things that we can do for them. We can't walk into their house and pack boxes for them. I mean, I guess we could, but that's not really, it's not going to be your best dollar per hour activity. I'll tell you that. You know, when your buyer at the last minute is just like, I just don't know about this or that thing, if I'm willing to not take this and, you know, still close. Denise, I'm glad you brought up, you know, the cost of the repair versus the amount of equity that they will gain if they stay in the home for a certain amount of time. Just reminding them what they said at the beginning of how they can win with you, and show them how you've done that. How, you know, I've done this, and that. You told me I would win with you if we got, you know, to this point, and look, we're here. I get it. We have a little more, you know, to go before we're quite there and the keys are in your hand, or out of your hand if you're on the sell side. But just remind them of, like, I've done everything that you said would be a win for you. And guess what? We're still winning. Your stress level might be high, but you are still on the winning side of this. And reminding them of that, and not being afraid to collect those thank yous throughout the transaction and say you're welcome each time. One of my mentors once said to me, if someone said thank you to you to your face and you didn't say you're welcome, don't you think they would feel some kind of way? You know, if someone says thank you over text, always take the opportunity to say you're welcome. If someone says thank you to you over email, always take the opportunity to respond with you're welcome, smiley face. You know, those you're welcomes add up to winning with you. And showing your client, I'm doing what you said I would do. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You know, to all of the little thank yous throughout, and not leaving those hanging. Or you can even remind them, you know, you told me that this is really what you were looking for. We've got a little bit left to go to get to the closing table. If you're willing to move forward with this, I'm sure we can move forward. And then asking, if you're on, you know, the side of the transaction that doesn't feel like it's a win, ask, is this a deal breaker? Are you guys going to walk away if we don't do this? That's a question. That's not a hesitation. So if you're on the sell side and a buyer asks for the world, the very first thing I would say is, I'm happy to present this repair request to my seller. If you could just let me know, what are your deal breakers first? Of this list, what are your deal breakers? What will your buyer walk away if we don't do? And then you can take that, you know, hopefully edited list of requests to the seller and say, hey, this list of 15 things is what they started at. I asked them what their deal breakers were. Here's the 5 deal breakers. and then you've already had that conversation, and that eases the blow of a request to start with, because you're telling them, hey, I already went to work for you. I went to bat for you to start with before I came to you about it. You can let them know, hey, I've got a repair request in hand. I'm trying to figure out what the deal breakers are. I'll be with you, later today to let you know kind of where we stand. And then once the buyer's agent says, here are the deal breakers, these, small amount of things, would be the deal breakers, then you can talk about, repairs versus concessions and all that kind of stuff, and how you can win and, have a successful negotiation as far as that goes. But I would say ultimately just get back to, you said I could win with you by doing this. Look at everything we've done together. Congratulations. We're almost there. Hang on to this last little bit of stress before we get to closing, and let's push through and get there. And that always kind of reframes things for me when I have a buyer who's, frustrated with the move from one place to another. A lot of the time, the buyers that I have worked with are out of state. They're moving from Michigan and Chicago and Texas and Florida and, all these places that are not, like a hop, jib, and a scump, hop, jib, however you say that. Words are hard
Thank
today.
you. I'm gonna let, really quick, thank you, Carlyn, and I want to make sure we're mindful of everyone's time. Denise, do you have one quick thing that you want to share in addition to everything that Carlyn and Rasa have shared about getting to the closing table? Because I feel like you have like so much magic, and I'm sorry we don't have more time today. I'm sure we'll have you guys on plenty of other times. And do you have one more thing or no?
I'm trying to think of something that wasn't already said,
Okay.
but ultimately just coming from cooperation and contribution and being able to see past the little hiccups and recognize that real estate is never easy, but it's simple, which I say all the time to both sides. I say it to my own clients and I say it to the agent on the other side, is this process is actually quite simple, but it's never easy. So it is not unusual to be experiencing what we are experiencing. I also will identify the age of the home and some of the things that have come up during it and whether or not that's typical, because saying something's a big deal or not is not up to me, whether or not it's a big deal for me. It may be a big deal for your client, or maybe a big deal for the seller, right? So saying for a home from 1978, this is typical. For a home built today by Lennar, this is typical. And also reminding them a little bit with that gain of value as we go over time. So, this neighborhood, we're seeing values gained X amount over a period of Y. So then you're still telling them as we go through complications, just remember, we're in the experience now of being able to obtain this. This is one of the most valuable assets you will ever own. But no, this is how you're going to be gaining. This is what we're looking at that's predictable based on what we've seen in the past. We don't have a crystal ball, but these are some of the things that we use to see how your money is indeed going to work for you, despite getting through some of the hiccups and hurdles that are there. And the same with financing. I think we can all tell a story about some strange financing thing we've had happen this year. I feel like it's actually getting harder with that, even though the process is even more strenuous to do the application. But just with some of the unusual things that are happening with rates being here, and then they go here, and they go back here, and they go to there. So affordability being low, reminding people too, the way that you feel is totally reasonable based on what you're doing. You're spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. That sounds pretty stressful, right? Okay, well, think about how the cost of borrowing now is 3 times what it was 3 years ago. So you are facing a lot of different factors that maybe have nothing to do with the condition of the home. But the condition of the home is what you're feeling right now because you're remembering, gosh, my payment is higher than where I want it to go. Your payment can change. That is one thing we can change. The condition of the house, we can change that too. We can't change your lot, your layout, and your location very easily, but we can change some of those other things. You tell me the best way for us to proceed. I'm not going to live in this house. I want to come over, and I hope you have me over later. But keep in mind, this is your home. If it's starting to feel like it's one you don't connect with anymore, that's okay, and we can move on. Going back to that whole, like Rasa was saying, letting it go. Like it all comes out in the wash. And sometimes people will say, but you've worked so hard. Like if you have a termination, I feel really bad. You've worked so hard on this. And I say, well, you have too. But if it doesn't make sense for you anymore, we're not going to force this to work. I don't want you to wake up tomorrow and go, gosh, I really wish that I wasn't buying that house. I think the likelihood of people terminating in the market today is higher just based on where the affordability index is for us nationally. Doesn't mean homes are worse. It means it just costs more to do it. So would it make sense for you to go, I'm having a little more pause? And then usually it's going back to think about it, talk to the stakeholders in your life. We don't have to decide on this call right now. We have until this time. I'm going to follow up with you at that time. that's when we need to decide how we're moving forward. And then most of the time, people are going to do it anyway. Well, you're right. I mean, out of the 10 houses we saw, as you mentioned, Denise, this one is really the only one that has those factors that are really important to me. And yeah, my payment's 2,600 and I wanted it to be 24. But to your point, after talking to my loan officer and looking at some of the patterns that we have in terms of where rates are going, there probably will be a period in the next 24 months where I can refinance and I can see that change. But I can't afford the 2,600 today. So maybe I will just do it. Because again, the houses are selling for more than they were selling for last year. They were selling for more than that. If anything, we saw prices come down, what, 5%, and then have gone back up again. So if you wait 2 years, you may pay more anyway for a home in similar condition. So it's just analyzing all that and having them feel empowered to make the choice with you being their CFO. That's a term I will say is I'm the CFO of your transaction. I will spend your money the way you tell me to spend it. It's not my money, it's yours. You're the CEO. So if you tell me this ends today, it ends today. But just know that my goal is to be able to walk you through how we got to where we were, the information that we have, and how likely it is that the scenario could occur again. So then you can make the best informed decision.
Thank you so much. And I know Rasa had to go. We are about 5 minutes over. However, I do want to take time to make sure that if you have 1 or 2 questions, if you can just type in the chat or say out loud 2 or 3 things that stand out to all of you who took the time to be on. I would just love for the ladies who are here to be able to be confirmed in the time that they invested with you and for them to understand what hit for you the most. So please share what stood out to you. You can unmute yourself and talk.
I guess I would say that, just listening to some of them talk, I need to dive maybe more into some numbers. I have basically the same conversations all of them have, how do you want to communicate? It's not my house. I go in with that mentality too, talking about, they're having blow ups and what have you. With not my house, not, I'm not mad at the other agents or whatever, not unless they give me a reason to be. But some of the numbers, I guess, that they're talking about, I might need to dive in more, know a little bit more stats and maybe even my stats, because I really don't keep up with some of my numbers.
I love that. I love that. And so every one of the ladies talked about numbers in some way. So that's so good. David asked for the 3 L's to be listed again.
Oh,
So
lot, layout, location. Here, I'll put it in here.
lot, layout,
Love it.
location. Awesome.
Yeah, that
And
was
David, I
my
saw you
view.
making comments throughout
Hey.
it. You want to share? Hey, how are
Yeah,
you?
I just dipped in as calls and stuff kept coming in. I love learning about this. Denise, thanks and I took notes. Denise, Carolyn, I see you again.
Good to see you too.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I learned, I'm in new construction, but like these are all the same things that we can all use. Tricks of the trade. I love numbers. I'm a numbers guy. The numbers don't lie. It's not my opinions. It's just, these are the facts. And it kind of helps paint the story. So yeah, I love all this stuff. And I use, my question that I say is, or my statement is, what's the alternative? Because I kind of remind people when, especially because I'm all buyers for the most part here. I'm reminding people, if this isn't the one, what is the alternative? Or going back to rent, is that the alternative, right? And then breaking it down with numbers.
Yeah, that's a great point.
If you're paying $1,900 in rent, then this $2,100 mortgage, you say to yourself, that's a lot. Your alternative is going $1,900 in rent and then reverse engineering and saying, oh, your mortgage, well, 500 of that is principal.
Exactly.
But when you think about it,
your rent is 100% interest,
right? So
100% interest.
I go back to the numbers, but I always say, what's the alternative? That's mine. Because sometimes they get in that emotion-based kind of stuff. They think that they're saying no to some items because of the emotion part of it, and you just kind of got to break it down to the facts, the numbers, or the alternative. No, you know what? That is the alternative. Maybe I should jump on this one.
Awesome. Thank you. One more person, and lots of amazing things have been mentioned in the chat. One more person have something. It sounds like the 3 L's were really good. Numbers resonated well with everyone, which you guys couldn't have made me more proud. I'm sure you planned that just for me. and learning about market knowledge. The simple question, what are the deal makers and deal breakers? That was a common thing that was mentioned. Anything else? Who has a burning desire to share before we go?
I would say one last thing, as far as negotiating goes, is not only asking the right questions, but I'm glad that David brought up, what's the alternative? Ask yourself, am I doing what's best for my client by having this conversation in this way? So I know Miss Ashley Biggins, who doesn't have her camera on right now, she did a phone a friend to me the other day about a negotiation that she was in the middle of which, Saundra, you have my permission to share my contact information with anyone on this call. I'm happy to be on the other side of a phone a friend if you guys need a little help with something. But she had a situation where things just got too difficult and her buyers were just like, we don't know what to do. And I, had a really good opportunity to remind her of her position in the transaction and how I would navigate it if it were me. But ultimately she had to go back to her client and say, it's in your best interest to probably walk away from this one. We have worked really hard and we have, gotten to a point where we got to draw a line in the sand. It's not in your best interest to move forward, and let them be okay with that. And sometimes the best negotiating is walking away. Sometimes that is in your client's best interest. So a lot of things can be negotiated through to get to closing, but sometimes walking away is ultimately the best thing for the client. And that's okay. That's why we have to study our own numbers. I'm glad, Jeff, that one of the impact points for you was to study your own numbers. Really know your conversion rates. Know how many conversations it takes for you to get to an appointment. Know how many appointments it takes for you to get to a contract, and know how many contracts it takes for you to get to a closing. Sometimes you'll sign 5 buyer agency agreements in a month and you'll only close one of them. And it'll take another 6 to 8 months for you to get to a closing with any of the others. So really know your stats, know what it's going to take for you to get to a closing. And then as far as the listing appointments go, how many listing appointments lead to a contract? How many of those contracts lead to a closing? Really study your numbers so that you know what it takes, and don't be afraid to share your numbers with your clients. Hey, it takes me usually about 10 showings to generate you an offer. And then as your numbers get better, hey, it usually takes me 8 showings to get you an offer. As numbers get better, share that with them. We've had 20% less showings, but the same amount of offers over the last 6 months from my business. Over the Canopy MLS, it's taking 18 showings to get an offer. So my business performs at a faster rate than what our MLS is doing. So in our partnership, you can expect that, that will very likely outperform the MLS, but here's what's going on in our market anyway, just so you know.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I love the language of real estate and speaking numbers, and you all have talked about that in addition to many, many other strategies to help around negotiations. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all of you hanging in there 12 minutes over. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you. If you'll just share the top takeaways that you have on social media and share about the Legacy Collaborative. Remember, our goals are to get to 300 people inside the collaborative and the network on Facebook by the end of May. So who do you know that needs to be in these conversations and wants people like you to build their business and lift them up? And then if you know someone that needs to move their business to the next level and is looking for a great coach, make sure you introduce them to me. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.